Recording.
Howdy, howdy. What's going on,
Hey,
Greg?
man, living the dream.
Yeah. This is the first episode of our podcast here. Can you see I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully you can see it.
The
Right
Free
now it's pretty
People's
empty.
Podcast.
Oh yeah. So, and I know you and I talked a little bit on Facebook about the general purpose of this podcast, and what I'm trying to do here is uh, mainly it's talk to rural voters and like Southern voters about politics in general, but a lot of times more specifically about progressive politics, because a lot of times people don't understand, uh, especially I know a lot of people just don't know a lot of the good faith arguments. They hear a lot of the bad ones. And the same is true for lefties too, especially in not rural parts of the country. Like they don't, some of them may have not heard a argument and or good arguments for maybe conservative politics or what have you. Um, and another thing is progressives in general have been complaining about the DNC for a long time, not giving a damn about flyover states and rural voters in general. They kind of wrote them off for various reasons. Uh, so like they don't really. So like people like you and like me have not really, especially when it comes to the Democrat Party, hasn't they haven't paid us no mind and given they don't speak to what matters to us on a material level, other than in primary states like Iowa. Like, but as soon as the primaries are over in Iowa, they stop caring there too. Um, so if you want to tell all the six people who are probably going to watch this video or listen to this podcast, Greg, a little bit about yourself and what you do, and we're going to get into later about farming and the environment and hunting and stuff like that. But go ahead if you want to just give a little quick background about yourself.
Yes, Greg DeBoer. I hail from Alabama, although I was born in Michigan. Uh, Eventually, with my dad, we made our way down south. Alabama's home. That's where I grew up at. Uh, I graduated high school, spent 11 years in the Army. I was a combat engineer, spent a couple years at Bragg as a paratrooper.
Hold on, my
Did
daughter's acting nutty. Marjane, Daddy, come on. Sorry about that. This
Oh,
is
it's okay.
literally like 3 minutes in the podcast, and my daughters are like, "Turn me on amazing."
Well, it's just a matter of time before it happens here too. So, but no, so I went to Iraq 03, 04, and spent a couple more years in the Army, and it was time to go home. Got out and back to Alabama I come. A little bit more about me is I do farm, and I imagine we'll get into how I got into farming here in a little bit. And I work for the VA as well. So, as well as volunteer with a group called the Fallen Outdoors. We help getting veterans outside hunting and fishing and other type activities. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of the down and dirty. I'm married, got two boys. Things are important to me are family, farming, veterans, and outdoors. And then there's sub things fall under the farming and that kind of go a little bit further into it, but that's the down and dirty of me.
Oh yeah, brother. Yeah, because do we ever actually meet in person with Fallen Outdoors? Because I've only done like a few of the events we had before I got the job
I
offer
don't
over
think
here.
so. I think it's just jaw jacking on Facebook,
Probably there's a whole lot of that.
and it hasn't slowed down. So yeah.
Oh man. Um. So tell me about your farming, the farming y'all do out there. I've seen you talk about like post about it on Facebook, and I was like, I'm super jelly sometimes. But go ahead and
Yeah.
talk about that
So
a little bit.
so this kind of or kind of roll a couple things into one here. I got out of the Army, and I got a I got out in 2009. The job market was crap then, and Trump was not president then. But the job market was crap, uh, and I probably put in 100 resumes. And as an experienced leader, I expected to come in, making decent money and going into a leadership position. whether it be just like a first line or second line supervisor, somewhere in that. I wasn't looking for a CEO position. So I got an interview with a temp agency. They're like, hey, yeah, no, they don't want to interview you. And then they called back and said, yes, they do want to interview you. And I was like, temp agency, what the crap is that? So if you don't know, a lot of these businesses will hire temporary employees, kind of like test driving them. And if they don't like them, at the end of the 90 days, they can send them going, and there's no harm, no foul. After 90 days, they do have the option to be hired on. At least that was the agreement where I worked at, was 90 days. So, and that's how the temp agency makes their money, is they charge a percentage based off that. Anyways, so I interviewed with this guy, and he's like, name's Don Heidelberg, and I'm friends with him today. He said, well, you know what type of job you're interviewing for? I'm like, well, I think it's a supervisor job. So we don't have that. So well, I don't have a job. So if you want to keep going, I'm good with that. Let's just keep rocking. So I'm pretty sure that secured me the job as a laborer there instantaneously. But we went through the interview, and of course I got the job offer, and I started out at the very, very bottom, basic, like a brand new private there at the steel company. I was pulling orders of steel for customers. Like 2 days into it, and Don had just taken over that branch. He stopped everybody and made them clean. While all the other employees were mad and crap about having to clean. And I'm like, I'm grinning from ear to ear, pushing that broom. I looked over and said, hey, this is one thing I am qualified to do. In fact, if you want this thing mopped when we're done, we'll mop it. And that's just the mentality I had, because that was literally something that I'd been trained to do in the Army.
So what half your job in the Army, just sweeping and mopping?
No, I was a combat engineer, but.
I mean, I'm joking. Even the Air Force guys, like, we have to clean them up sometimes.
Yeah. Well, every day before we got to go home, the company had to be swept and mopped, so, and the garbage taken out. So, I wanted to go home. And that was one thing we were good at. So, anywho, I progressed fairly fast inside that company because, it was real easy. The boss said, you use this barcode scanner, and when you put something here, you log it there. And when you pick something up and it's not logged to there, you log it to the correct spot. Simple as that, and I don't know what 2x2 by quarter angle is, whereas these guys have been doing it for a long time, could spot it, so it had to be in the right spot for me because I was a dummy. I'm an Army guy. So anyway, so I adapted fairly well. I progressed with them. But then I started going to college too. And, I was making all A's in school, and then they started falling back. And then I started having just regular issues with work, and I'm like, something's wrong with you. You're screwed up. You're a jerk. You're a jackwagon, and so all that was going on. And, I left there, went to another company, and then I wound up working for another company that literally they have 6 supervisors, and they went through like 12 while I was there. It was a terrible place to work. And then I was working nights. I got up in the middle of the night. Well, in the middle of the day, it was like 4:00, but it was in the middle of the night for me. And I had a pain in my side. My wife's like, you want to go to the hospital? I'm like, yes. And I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't go to the doctor. So wound up my appendix ruptured. So they gave me this stuff called Oxycontin or oxycodone, one of the two, and I felt good for the first time in a long time. And not like a high good, but just the weight of the world was off my shoulders. And I was riding with the motorcycle club at the time, and I had access to all that stuff. All I had to do is make a phone call, and I could have as much of that delivered to my house as I wanted with no questions asked. And it scared me, so I flushed the pills. So, it's just kind of interpersonal struggle going on, and knowing how good I could have felt. So then I went to my vocational rehab counselor, because I was in vocational rehab for paying for my school, and talked to my counselor, and she's like, yeah, you're way more jacked up than what you're rated at. You need to go get some help. So she sent me to the other part of the VA, and I talked to the mental health provider, and he was like, oh, yeah, blah, 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 blah. It sounds like you could benefit from some of our drugs. It'll be 6 months before you see one of our doctors, though, so you should probably just move to Colorado and smoke dope. Well, that wasn't a viable option for me, and I got online and started looking at, therapeutic type stuff for veterans. And that's when I saw how good farming was for for vets, working with soil, working with animals, that type of stuff. And so I started dabbling a little bit in that, and I also found out I could walk into the VA down in Birmingham to the main hospital, and I saw somebody on the spot. They kind of got me rolling there. But that's kind of how I got into farming. And I started out with just a 4x4 garden that turned into half my backyard tilled, to 3/4 of my backyard tilled, to having pigs in my backyard. And I lived in a subdivision, so my neighbors loved me. Yeah. So Alabama Extension Agency sent out an email through, and it got somebody from Still Serving Veterans had got a copy of the email and forwarded it out. That's how I got a copy of it. And it was about this program called Operation Grow. And it was used to introduce veterans to agriculture. So once again, this was, I don't know if it was a federal grant. It was some type of grant. Chris Becker, who is the extension agent, was in charge of it. I'm still friends with him today as well. He's been a great mentor to me and a friend throughout all these years. He was setting up vendors for an event and invited another major veteran organization in, and they agreed. And they said, "Oh, no money, no guaranteed jobs. We're not coming." So that's when his dad is a veteran. That's when he decided that we need to do something for the veterans. So he built this program and researched and found grant funding. Like I said, I don't know if that's federal grant funding or it's private. I would assume that it's probably federal, but he applied for it, got it, and implemented this program. So I wind up being this guy's his success dummy. I'm the only one that went through the program and that was stupid enough to actually go through with farming. That's our running joke. So the big challenge was, how do I go from living on a 1-acre lot in a subdivision to owning a 34-acre farm? And that's a big challenge to a lot of people. A lot of vets, man, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that, but I don't know how. How do I have a mortgage on a house and then justify buying a mortgage on a farm too? And not having farm experience. There's just so many barriers there. The cost to enter. Buying a tractor. Buying livestock, or just funding vegetables. Just setting up a vegetable production is so expensive. But it's a lot more expensive than people think. That green bean that you eat at the store costs a lot more than what you would think to grow and produce. Anyways, the tomatoes, that's another thing, man. The freaking tomatoes cost a lot more to grow than what you would think.
Yeah, don't get me started on tomatoes. I got like a whole thing of we're like a lot of people who during this coronavirus business decided we're going to grow vegetables, and we grew some tomatoes, and they turned out okay at best.
Yeah.
It's nutty here because winter. Yeah,
you weren't getting yields of 25 pounds per plant, were you?
No, we weren't. That's what happens when we went and bought the seeds from for people out there listening. I live in Germany with my wife. We work for the government, and so I bought my tomato seeds at the BX, and so we were growing tomatoes on our balcony in these planter bag things, and like the tomatoes were good. They turned out all right, but it was a lot of work for about maybe like 100 tomatoes or so. It was a lot. Most of the tomatoes wound up getting thrown out because they'd go bad before we could eat them.
Yeah, and yeah, so there was all those questions. So I was talking with Chris, and I can totally relate to that on the tomatoes. So I was talking with Chris. I'm like, how do I do this? How do I transition? How do I transition? How do I do this? And he kept telling me, man, look for land around you that's not being used. Just find out who owns it and reach out to them. Just find something that's not being used. There'll be somebody that will let you use their land, or you can rent it from them. So literally a half a mile from my house, there was a field on the right-hand side of the road, and then a huge field on the left-hand side of the road. And it looked like they weren't doing anything with it, but just bush hogging it. They weren't even cutting it for hay. So I kept telling myself, I got to stop in there and ask them. I got to stop in there and ask them. I got to stop in there and ask them. And I never did. Well, Labor Day come around, and they had a yard sale. So I was like, that's it. This is my chance. So I pulled in there, and I asked the lady, and she said, let me ask my husband. So mind you, I told you I went to Iraq in 2003, 2004. I was in Mosul. Uh, so I talked to this guy once again. Now, the talking to a civilian and going, oh, well, I went to Iraq, I struggle with PTSD, and this is the therapeutic stuff that, that's hard to tell somebody, and that's not getting into all the details of it. It's just in general, hey, this is why I want to do this. Well, I think everything was put in place for me. Come to find out, this guy was a CW3 or CW4 warrant officer in the Army National Guard and was in Mosul, Iraq in 03, 04, 04, 05. So, he was there in 2004. We basically crossed paths, but didn't exactly cross paths. But he was in literally, we walked the same dirt, the same soil over there. And we actually knew a lot of the same people as well. So, I was talking to him. I'm like, hey, look, this is why I want to do it. So it clicked, it worked, and he was like, oh yeah, I understand what you're trying to do. Absolutely. So, I wound up getting that property. It's like 6 acres, 7 acres, I think. And I did vegetables on it. Well, in the meantime, Chris, like, hey man, since you're my success dummy, I got a group called Alabama Farmers Federation. They had heard about the program and wanted to do a story, but I didn't have a story yet. I'd like for you to be the story. I said, okay. So now that I officially had land and we were ready to break ground and actually, progress. So they came out, did the story, sent it out. Girl I went to high school with sees the story, sends it to her dad, who's a retired lieutenant colonel. And he reaches out to me. He's like, hey, look, me and my brother and sister, we just bought a farm. We were looking at hiring somebody to manage it. How about a veteran? Why not? So I wound up partnering with Randy, and we eventually moved out to Baileyton and sold our house in Vinemont. So that's kind of how we progressed out of the 1 acre lot. And so ideal, not everybody's going to have that opportunity, but it worked out good for us. And then we lived there on the farm in Baileyton for a couple of years, sold our place, and then found our own farm and positioned into buying our own place where we've got 34 acres. And this place was not turnkey when we got here. It had literally had about 1 acre fenced around the pond. And when the guy was showing me the property, I don't know how much you know about fencing and animals, but when the guy was showing me the property, he's like, oh yeah, these horses done a real good job of keeping both sides of the fence cleaned up. It's because they had leaned over the fence and basically the fence was non-existent. So we
would have been my guess.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, oh man, they ruined that fence. They haven't done you a favor, guy. They destroyed that. So anyways, we got out here, we've been fencing, we've been cross fencing. And we can kind of jump back to that here in a minute. But one of the things I used was, the USDA Farm Service Agency. And that's who helped me to finance my farm. And there's some criteria to it. It's a very hard loan to get because they do have so many requirements that you have to hit. When you file your taxes as a farmer, you file a Schedule F, okay? And it's like your business taxes, but it's strictly farm related. Things have line numbers. Your fertilizer and your lime have different line numbers, and your cost of animals is another. But it runs just like a business. It's just categorized a little bit different. So you have to have 2 years. You have to have 3 years of Schedule F filed in order to qualify for this loan, and that's one of the things. One of the many requirements basically says you got to have 3 years experience. It's either filing a Schedule F or managing a farm or, there's other things. But if you make E5 or above in the military, that waives one of those years. Well, I had 1 year of Schedule F filed. And then, of course, I made the rank of E5, or the pay grade of E5. So that counted for a second year. And I literally had to wait until my taxes got filed to get that 3rd year Schedule F in order to apply for this loan. So the other thing about it is I left a really good paying job, but it was going to kill me. I mean, it literally was going to kill me. I had left every chest pains and gone to the ER. The high level of stress, it just was not a good work environment, especially for me. So I tried to make it go farming. So I left the job making really good money to making absolutely nothing. And of course, I had bills of a really good job, and it's hard to pay with almost nothing. Uh, so my credit kind of took a hit. And that's one of the things about the Farm Service Agency, their direct home loan, is to work with folks like myself. I realized that I couldn't do it just farming, so I went back into the work field and got a job off the farm, got all my bills caught up, but my credit was still garbage. So this loan is designed for people that have less than stellar credit but are on the mend. And so that's the route that we went. And you can't have any, there's other requirements, but basically I'd gone a year without any late payments, without anything in collections, without anything past due, but it still wasn't good enough that I could walk into, Bank of America. They're like, oh yeah, how much do you want here? We're just going to write you a check. So that makes it tough because now you're dealing with, anyways, that's one of the requirements on it. Like I said, and then it takes so long. So here's some of the disadvantages of it. Is it takes so long to close. You have to, especially in today's real estate market, folks list a farm and they want to have that thing sold in a month, and they want to be closed and they want to move on. So you got to find somebody who's willing to not only go, hey, not only are they not pre-qualified because they don't pre-qualify people, but this process could take 6 to 9 months to close. Which is wild considering most people are closing in 2 weeks to 45 days. It's a long process. We found a guy, he was like, yeah, I'll work with you. So once again, things kind of fell into place for us. And then they also financed our cattle and financed our fencing. So I'm in debt like forever.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I got to where I'm at right now. Like I said, there are disadvantages to it. I'm married to having 14 mama cows and one bull. Until my loan is freaking paid off, or as long as it's with Farm Service Agency, I must have a minimum of 14 mama cows and one bull. And that's if I wanted to run all steers here, because there's different types of farming. There's people that run just a cow-calf operation, and that's all they do is they take their calves and they take them to the stockyard and they sell them, and then they hope that cow's pregnant again. And then they got other folks that are direct marketing meat. Like I'm running calves that are born on the farm, all the way fed out to where they're getting processed. I think there's a lot more money involved in it. Now there's a lot more time, and there's a lot more money on my end, but the potential for me to make more money is there at the end of the day. And then there's other guys that will take, they'll buy those calves and they'll get them from 500 pounds to 900 pounds, and then they go off to the Midwest somewhere and get fattened out. I can't change my freaking plan without basically rewriting the loan on my farm. So
Yeah.
that is one of the disadvantages of it. And then they're supposed to come out, because it is a supervised loan, they're supposed to come out once a year and say, yes, you do have 14 cows. Yes, you do have one bull. Yes, you are running a cow-calf operation. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into farming, how I got where I'm at now, how the government has helped me out. And I do feel like that those are hand-ups and not handouts, because I'm still paying every dime of it back. It's just a way to help folks. And they really, as far as veteran friendly, I mean, they really want to work with veterans. That is, it's a category that it's a category check. The Javier, the guy that I worked with when I first started going there, he's like, man, this would be a really good loan. If we can make this work, this can be a really good loan. This can be a really good loan. We hardly ever get veterans come in here that fit the criteria, and that are able to make the loan work. So, yeah, so that's how I got to there. And I could talk about some other farming stuff you want to talk about NRCS, some of the programs that they have. Where do you want to go with it?
I don't know. I think we can go more into the, like, I guess generally brass tacks of politics in general, but especially when it comes to like farming. Uh, like, what do you think, especially like, because I know you said you work off farm too,
Yeah.
and I've been reading a bunch because like I don't know a whole bunch about farming. My wife and I thought about farming a while back, and then like one of the big things is we didn't have, the getting revenue to buy land and everything to start a small farm was rather difficult. Like you said, there's a whole lot of barriers to entry, and
There are.
yeah, and so we've done a little bit of research, and we were close to it at one point. And I think one of the main things that was really one of the reasons we didn't do it was in order for us to move out somewhere and buy land and start a farm, we would have basically had to have chosen between having a good education for our kids in the neighborhood we lived in, and then move to one of these very rural areas in Alabama where where quality of education is just not there. And that's not the fault of anybody that lives in these areas. That has to do with how
No,
how we fund our schools. But
I completely understand. So the school that we went to, the two county schools that the kids went to, uh, were absolutely terrible. I mean, they're good schools, don't get me wrong, but the level of education that they were receiving, the way that they graded out, they were, ranked like 150 or 180 in the state,
yeah,
and that's not the education I want my kids to get either.
yeah,
So once again, we
yeah,
lucked out with the farm
mhm.
that we got. We're in Arab City schools,
Yeah.
and they
Arab
are
surprisingly
consistent.
isn't that bad.
Yeah, they're a top 15 school in the state every single year, uh,
Mm.
and and we're technically inside the city limits, believe it or not. Uh, so we're in a school district, and so the boys are getting a top notch, best education you can get, really. Could they get a little bit better if they were going to a school in Madison? Maybe, but I can't complain about the quality of education. So I 1000% understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I would have a hard time moving to someplace, down in South Alabama where I could get land dirt cheap and could be 3 or 4 times the size I am now,
yeah.
uh,
Your kids
and
might not know how to
sacrifice that.
read, but
Yeah, yep,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That we thought about that, and like, because we lived in Madison at the time, and so we were looking all over, and we were trying to be like, could we even get in a place with a decent school? Anytime we found a place that we could afford, it would be, I'm not going to throw rocks at any potential neighborhoods, but like,
Right.
the education just would not be there.
Yep.
And this kind of goes into another one of the things that would probably be a good idea to talk about is like, how much, like, especially in Alabama, you can notice it because it's kind of like a microcosm of the country at large. Is you got an area like Huntsville that's extremely affluent, extremely well off in Madison and whatnot. You just drive across the river, and you can get into some places where you know the there's just a way more poverty, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and there's no like major grocery stores. There's no normal grocery stores. You could
Absolutely.
drive you could drive through places. There ain't nothing but a Dollar General to buy groceries at.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so I was wondering, what have as somebody who's a farmer, have you ever like which of these, when you think about rural populations and rampant poverty, and what are keeping these, what's keeping these areas from having? Well, I'm like, what are
So
like? Yeah, you go
so
ahead.
Bayleton's a prime example. I want
Mhm.
and don't quote me at this number, but I would say probably 80% of the folks that went to school there where my boys went to school were on free or reduced lunches. The poverty level is it's extreme there. And once again, the only thing in that town to get something to eat at or to get food at or whatever is a Dollar General. You could go about 15 minutes down the road to Fairview, and there's a mom and pop grocery store there. Other than that, you're driving 30 minutes to 20 to 30 minutes to the nearest Walmart, which, in a metropolitan city, 20 or 30 minutes is only a couple miles down the road. But, yeah. So, and I tell you what else is, we were half a mile off of the main highway, and we didn't have internet, no internet, no cable, literally, we were half a mile off the main road, and we have no internet, couldn't even get dial up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say that's a barrier. So I recruited for a while too for the Army, and I was up in Northeast Arkansas, and one of the things that I saw, and this is as a recruiter, and somebody I could tell somebody that, hey, look, and this is not a pitch to join the Army, but I'd be like, hey, look, this is what the Army can do for you. We're going to get you out of here. You're going to be able to see the world. You're going to have, housing. You're going to have food. You're going to have medical. You're going to get training. And these people are living in a house that's going to fall apart. I walked up to kids' house one day, and they had kids that were probably 4 or 5 wearing diapers with poop running down their legs still, and just absolute poverty. And they don't know anything different. They're like, they can't grasp, and I'm far from being rich myself, but they can't grasp, anything other than borderline third world poverty, because that's all they know. Their grandparents grew up that way. Their parents grew up that way. They're growing up that way, and it's something that they can't even grasp. And I'm not saying that being negative. It's just, and it probably sounded negative, but I really didn't mean it that way. It's just a concept that people don't see, It's like, I got a buddy of mine went to Washington, D.C. with me, because I met with Congressman Aderholt and Senator Shelby with the White House Budget Committee, advocating to get farm money for veterans and farmers, and for sustainable agriculture. When we went up there, he had never even flown before. And his idea of going to a big city was going to Birmingham. So when we got to Washington, D.C., his eyeballs were wide open the whole time. It's just something that he probably would have never imagined. And he's coming from the rural area, and not in the poverty or anything like that, but he's coming from a rural area where if I told him, hey man, you're going to ride in a taxi, and we're going to be cutting people off left and right, laying on the horn, trying to hit people crossing the road, and he would have never fathomed that. So, yeah, he was wide-eyed the whole time, like, oh my goodness, and then when we got back home, literally, we pulled into his driveway. He seen his cows, and he about squealed, just to be back to where everything is slow paced, and mind you, things are not slow paced on a farm, but just a difference. So,
yeah.
That's my experiences on it. Is, you got people that's all they know, and that's the community that they grew up in, and that's how they grew up. How do you break that? And I would say that it may be that way with the inner city as well.
Yeah, there was, and I can't remember the name of the article, but there was like an article a while back that talked about how rural America was the new inner city. Everything, and I actually got a quote right here, and we can just transition more into rural life in general. But this was a guy named Wendell Berry wrote this quote in I forgot exactly where, I lost my citation, but he says, the business of America has been largely and without apology the plundering of rural America, from which everything of value, minerals, timber, farm animals, farm crops, and labor has been taken at the lowest possible price, as apparently none of the allotments is seen in the flying over bypassing on the interstate highways. Its too large fields are toxic and eroding, its streams and rivers poisoned, its forests mangled, its towns dying or dead along the locally owned small businesses. Its children are leaving after high school and not coming back. Too many of the children are not working at anything. Too many are transfixed by their various screens. Too many are on drugs, and too many are dying. And I mean, I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the podcast, how, especially with the DNC, like how the DNC's focus and how our country is really urbanized. Like it has been a big push to urbanization, move people to the big cities. Meanwhile, it pulls all these resources out of, these local communities. And you mentioned earlier that town where the only grocery store, the only place to get groceries is a Dollar General, or you can drive 15 miles to Walmart. You shop at both of those stores, every dime that you send into those stores doesn't even go to the workers that works there. It's not building, any kind of wealth in your local community. It's sending money. You're driving 15 miles to go to give money to the Walmarts, and they don't pay their employees a living wage, so that these
Right.
people are dependent on, normal taxpayers are actually, subsidizing these people's living, so that the Walton family don't got to pay a good wages to these people, and these people live in abject poverty. We're not benefiting from this scenario. The only people this scenario benefits is the corporations.
So I work in Huntsville, and the neighborhood that I work in, or the surrounding neighborhood, is not a high income. There's public housing right there in the area. And I'll tell you that it's funny. It's not funny, but we have the exact same problem exists there as what we're dealing with in rural America.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Dollar General there, and I'm not bashing Dollar General, but
No,
that's where
we're
these folks are
not
going.
bashing people who work there or shop there.
No.
They're not shopping there or work there because they want to.
That's where because they're walking.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these folks that they're walking, they walk to the Dollar General, they get what they need, and they go back home. Because once again, Walmart is, that's an eternity away if you're having to walk there. So they get most of their groceries there, and that's where they're shopping at. And it's like I said, it's very similar to rural America.
Yeah, and we lived in Madison. I tell you, you couldn't walk. Like I know exactly what neighborhood you're talking about, and you couldn't walk to, Of course, there's the Whole Foods, which Whole Foods is so drastically expensive that these people couldn't afford to shop there anyways. Nonetheless, the fact that they couldn't get to Whole Foods, even though it's only a few miles away. There's not suitable public transit to get to there or other grocery stores. And there's and so rural America and the inner cities, you see a lot of the same problems where, our unskilled labor market is dried up. The companies don't want to pay living wages to people if they can get away with it. And, there's just generally a malaise amongst working class folks who don't feel like the government represents them as working out or looking out for their interests. And they're right. They're just absolutely right because their government hasn't.
Yeah, so God, I wish I'd have been more prepared for some of these conversations. There was during the Republican. Hang on, my dog's flying in here. She's been outside. There was a senator or a congressman from South Carolina, and he was talking about putting jobs back in the community and training and God, I wish I would remember that quote, but it just really hit home. It's like, man, that's how you solve these problems with what we've got going on, and I tell you, as somebody that sees people that are trying to employ people, the work ethic's gone in America in a lot of areas where I saw a friend of mine said, who's got a plumber that's willing to work? I don't care what it's going to cost me. I need a plumber out here that's willing to work. Last year, we hired somebody to come out and run a forestry mulcher on our property, and I wanted to pay somebody $200 an hour. Of course, that's running the machine and, him showing up with $200,000 worth of equipment too. So just to put that in, I wasn't just paying him $200 an hour. But I had people come out like, oh yeah, I'll do it $125 an hour. Never show up. I'll do it for $150 an hour, never show up, never even come out and do a quote. Oh yeah, I'll come out and quote it, and then poof, gone. So I'm going to pay somebody a premium because they would actually show up. I got a buddy who is a commercial electrician, and when I took that leap of trying to farm full time, he would call me up random and be like, "Hey man, I got this big job. You want to come help me for a week or 2 weeks?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And that's what stuff like that kind of helped us stay afloat. But he paid me a premium. I'm like, "Dude, you're paying me, a lot more money than what I should be getting paid. I'm not skilled labor." He said, "You should." He said, "If I tell you to be here at 7 o'clock, you're here at 7 o'clock, and you're here all day long. You don't run off to get a drug fix. You don't run off because you got paid today and now you don't need money for 3 days. You show up every single day on time and you work all day." Because I told him, "Man, I'm so uncomfortable. I'm just standing here. I'm not doing anything. What do you want me to do?" He said, "You're here. That's what I'm paying you to do. When I need you here in 5 minutes, it's worth you standing here for the last 2 hours." And just getting somebody to show up to work, that's a challenge. We've tried to hire somebody to come out to the farm and work, to not full time, but a day here or there, and getting somebody to show up was difficult. So
Yeah,
how do we
I was
address that issue too?
well. I would say there's a lot of things because you kind of have to expect that if you're hiring somebody for a day here, a day there, that's not sustained work. It's going to be a lot harder to get people to be willing to, so people need full-time employment if,
Absolutely.
so like, if, that I can see how that's hard to get somebody for a day here,
So
a couple of days
I got a
later.
I got a buddy that was in Madison. Okay, he had a landscape company. He's a veteran as well. He had a landscape company, and he told a guy, and he actually he's moved on to another industry right now. But one of the big things of that was him not being able to have labor that would show up to work every day. If
Mhm.
he's committed to having 75 lawns a week maintained, right?
Mhm.
He needs to have X amount of employees there. And his struggle to have somebody, let me tell you, I worked a little bit with him too on the side with, "Hey, I need help on this job," or "I need help on that job." Uh, and, uh, and it worked out good for me because it allowed me to still continue to farm, and it gave me a little bit of extra, to help pay for, feed for next week or whatever, so it wasn't a big deal that it was just a couple of days, but he had full-time employees that wouldn't show up to work every day. He had one guy, he said, and he may have paid him like 10 or $12 an hour, which is, for labor, that's hell. A lot of minimum wage is less than that. So, it's
Yeah, it's
most
like
temp agencies
750.
start you. Yeah. Most temp employees start you out at $9 or $10 an hour. So, he was, and I worked for him, and it wasn't, it was hard work, but he wasn't running, you know, every second you had to be killing yourself. It was a fairly relaxed work environment. It was a good work environment, you know. Uh, and he told this guy, he's like, "Man," he said, "if you'll just show up to work every single day this week, I'll pay you $20 an hour." And on Thursday, you know what he did? He called in,
Yeah.
knowing that he would make double the amount of money if he'd just show up to work all week because he needed him there that week, you
Yeah.
know? So, my buddy's an electrician. We had that conversation. You either have a work ethic or you don't. You're going to work just as hard for $10 an hour as you are for $30 an hour because you're either going to have that work ethic or you're not.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot that goes on, um, like when you just look at the statistics, the most people we do know that majority of people want to work. It's not like you know, it's not like it's not like people are unwilling to work. Now, in different fields, there's all kinds of different, like some people have issues hiring, and this stuff happens. But the American people in general do want to work. Like prior to all the coronavirus stuff, there was the general unemployment rate was pretty low. Right now, the unemployment rate is pretty high, but that's because everybody's lost their jobs because of coronavirus. But
And
like,
maybe because I'm in a different world or different environment. I mean, I've been lucky that I've not missed a day of work due to the coronavirus.
yeah,
You know, I've had a job to go to every single day. You know, it's not slowed down, and you know,
yeah,
that's what I just not comprehending this part of it, because you know, I get the people who are not traveling, that it affects those folks in the hotel industry or the food industry. I get that, but I just bought a new Polaris, and they can't keep those things in stock. You know,
yeah,
people are spending money. You know, and I think it's Honda over in Talladega. You know, they're hiring people on the spot. That's how bad they need workers.
yeah,
But people are just not showing up. You know, and that seems to be. I see a lot more of that where people are going, "We're hiring on the spot. We're hiring on the spot." I watched a guy on an Alabama veteran page say, you know, well, I'm looking for work, you know, and there were so many places that, you know, this place is hiring, this place is hiring, this place is hiring. And I just don't get it. I mean, where do you, you know, oh, my job's gone, you know, well go look for a different industry, look for a different trade. You know, there's people that are hiring, and this guy looking $15 an hour to hire somebody to build decks, you know,
mm-hmm.
uh, and, and I got, not everybody can do that, but you know, that's not a bad, it's not bad for somebody who has no experience,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know,
work in
that
general
the
is
work
not.
is there. The
Yeah.
work
No, I
is
mean,
there.
yeah, work in general is not like. I mean, and generally, especially people on the left, we kind of have an idea that any kind of work is dignified. So, but like, and like all these different like small industries and stuff, they have like their own issues. Um, I'm kind of getting lost here.
Now, I've got a family member. She was affected by
Yeah,
it. You know,
yeah,
she's a single mom, and wound up. Uh, her work got shut down, slowed down, and you know, she was affected by it.
hmm,
And then on top of that, you know, she's got kids at home that she's got to take care of. You
yeah,
know, because now they're not going to school, so you know, that does make it difficult.
yeah.
So
And some of those physical, those very like labor-intensive jobs, especially for women. I think when we look at poverty in general, I have to pull up the statistics, but I feel like, and I'm pretty sure I remember this, like the majority of people who live in poverty in America, or like very low income, or single mothers, who there's all kinds of, like, they disproportionately work for minimum wage. There's all kinds of rigmarole why those why they why they work in those conditions. And many of these jobs that you're talking about are very labor intensive. So uh, men probably more capable of doing those jobs, and in the whole, but you don't see, a lot of them may already be employed, because women by and large are more likely to be, for lack of a better word, disenfranchised by the lack of service industry jobs, because they're the ones who tend to fill those positions more, uh, especially with restaurants closing and everything else, like all these like customer facing businesses you see crumbling right now with coronavirus. We can get back on the farming thing. So one of the things I want to ask you about farming is, have you read anything or heard anything about the agricultural impacts, not really necessarily impacts, but the focus on agriculture in like policies like the Green New Deal that a lot of people are advocating for?
I'm not real sure about the Green New Deal, but I'll
Mhm.
tell you that there's a the coronavirus has really it's hurt, that it's made it harder to farm in some ways. Uh, it's so big ag is a lot of the problem here. The government being in the way, for lack of a better way to put it, is a lot of the problem. So you've got these meat processors. So this is a general overview of cattle, and I'm far from being the expert on cattle, but you got the guy with the cow-calf operation who takes his cows and he gets them up to 500 pounds and then takes them to the stockyard. And then somebody else buys them at the stockyard and gets them from 500 to 900 pounds. And then they go from 900 pounds out to the Midwest and they go to a feedlot and they're fed out. And then they go to a processor, and there's only a couple big processors in the United States. And once again, my numbers may be wrong there. That's just my general understanding. I didn't grow up in agriculture. I don't know anything about it. I do know something about it, but I'm learning as I'm going. But that's generally how it works. So then the corona came down and it shut down these processors. And when it did, it caused a shortage of meat. And so now your cattle's backing up. So now you got cows that you just can't just stop feeding them. You're still feeding them. And, you're talking about, 18 to 30 months, in the pipeline here, So they have now, you can't just go, oh, well, the processor stops. The poultry industry could probably adjust a little bit more adequately because, they're at a 9-week grow out or a 6-week grow out or an 8-week grow out versus a cow that, like I said, you're talking, 20 to 30 months on, and that's what they call the futures market, I believe. They're predicting the future on it. Anyways, so it's backed up the cattle. So in turn, you got every Tom, Dick, and Harry who has a cow that goes, oh, well, meat shortage, I can charge whatever I want to. So they're going to call these local processors. Okay. And so the packers, they'll do hundreds of thousands of cattle a day. Okay. I don't know what their volume is, but it's definitely at least hundreds. Okay. Versus like my local processor, Lou Allen's Process, and that's who I use. He probably does maybe 30 to 40 animals a week, and before the corona, I could pick up the phone, call Harold and say, hey, Harold, I got 6 pigs I need to bring to you, and he'll go, okay, cool. 2 weeks. I'm like, all right, cool. And I bring them down in 2 weeks. Other processes were booked out 3 months and it seemed like, oh my God, they're booked out 3 months. That's forever, so now you got everybody that's got cows like, oh, well, I can make more money. So they call and they want a processing date, and then they want a processing date. Somebody else wants a processing date. And then it starts backing up and backing up and backing up. So if I were to call him today, and this is October of 2020, I'm looking at February, March, April of 2022 to process a hog or to process a cow.
Lord,
and yes. And it's not just calling Harold, it's calling every processor around here. So here's the catch to it. I can't process an animal on my farm. I can't get a walk-in cooler and kill a steer on my farm and hang it for 18 days and then take it and cut it up into, steaks and roast and ground meat and then turn around and go to the farmer's market and sell it. That's illegal because it wasn't inspected by the government.
Yeah.
Okay. It's regulated. It has to be inspected, whether it's by a state inspector or a USDA inspector. So, and I can't take it and have it custom inspected at like a deer processor. Go, hey Johnny, I need you to cut this up for me, and then turn around and go to the farmer's market and sell it. Now, if I want it done for myself, I can kill it and do it myself, or if I can find a deer processor that can handle a cow, then, and they'll do it. I can do that. And then it's just for myself, but that doesn't help my profit or my bottom line, because the goal of raising cattle is to sell the cattle and make money.
Yeah.
So that's how Corona has negatively affected the farmers. And it's not just me. There's a lot of people in my boat. There's a congressman in Kentucky who is fighting to introduce a bill that's going to reduce the government regulation or requirements on it. to where, custom processors can sell. But you still got that limited amount of processors. You still got those limited amount of processors around here. So you're still looking so far out. So let's look at pigs. Talk about pigs. Pigs are the same way. So I was raising pigs farrow to finish, which means that I've got the boar and I've got the sow on site that are bred. The piglets are raised here on the farm, and the only time they ever leave the farm is when they go to freezer camp. Okay. So I have a pig that is getting ready to have a litter. Okay. And it takes 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days from the time she's bred to the time she drops that litter. Okay. And then you got them on the sow for about 8 weeks. I have to call my processor 3 weeks before that sow was bred, or 4 weeks before that sow was bred, to book not that litter, but the next litter to be processed. And so now you're working magic. So it's not like a human that when they have a baby, they're going to have one, or like a cow that 99.9% of the time they have one. They have litters, and they could have 6, they could have 12, they could have 15. They could have 15 and decide to kill half of them, and now you're down to 6 or 7. So there's a big mystery there. So when you call and go for 2022 and go, hey, I need 10 slots, and then that sow has 15, now you're stuck with 5 extra pigs. And so that it's definitely created challenges to where it's hard to plan that far in advance.
Yeah.
The coronas has definitely affected that way. I will say that they have the I can't remember what the name of the act is, but it's some of that corona relief money. The state,
the Heroes Act or CARES Act?
No, it's not that. It's God, I can't remember what it's called. The state put out. Let's see if this paper says what it is. Corona Food Assistance Program is what it is. And they've actually got 2 acts that they put out. I recently got paid on Act 2. I got paid on Act 1 also, but it's relief money for farmers, because of the same problem. Because now I'm sitting on animals, or instead of getting $1.80 a pound or $1.60 a pound at the stockyard, folks are getting like $1 a pound, and you're like, oh well, that's 80 cents. That's not big, but when you're talking about 500 pounds and you're talking about taking 20 animals, that's huge. So this is one of the things that they've put in there, and it's based off of the amount of animals you have. But a guy like me, I'm not taking things to stockyards. My goal is I'm going to sell everything as whole and half hog, or whole and half beef, or whole and half hogs.
Yeah.
So that's how I make my money. That's my market. So, and now I'm backed up. Well, the state put out a very similar deal, but they are only targeting commercial folks that are taking their animals to the stockyard. So then you can say, oh, well, I sold, 10, and then they're getting checks for that. And it's not helping folks like me.
So I got a question when it comes to like the big ag farmers. I think I saw somewhere, I was prepping for our interview, I think I read somewhere that it was like 75% of all the agricultural, the entire agriculture market goes through like 2 companies or something like that.
Yep.
Some crazy statistic.
Yep.
I mean, and
they're
I'm going to
foreign at that.
Oh yeah. So I've actually got a question. Do you think, and so from what I was seeing, that you got these handful of companies that are, and this is like everything else, like big agricultural, corporate farming is it's very reflective on every single other major issue that we have, is that you've got a handful of companies that own the lion's share of the economy in that market, and then you've got, and this is in the case in almost every market, these corporate farms pull out the vast majority of the subsidies, and they control the economy, at least when it comes to food production.
Yep.
And
It,
go ahead.
yeah, and the thing is these packers, they're the ones that dictate the price of what we're paying for what we're getting for our they're paying, they're paying $1 a pound right now, instead of $1.80. And that's what they're paying on their end, paying for the product,
Mm-hmm.
And then they're turning around and charging, $8 a pound, $10 a pound for ground beef on the flip side.
Yeah.
So they're making money hand over fist. And check this out. They're foreign owned companies. They're Chinese owned and Brazilian owned.
Oh yeah.
And they just, I want to say it was 2 years ago, allowed the U.S. to accept Brazilian beef. So that's hurt the beef farmers even more. The cattle farmers, they're now bringing in Brazilian beef.
Mm-hmm. And they probably obviously aren't paying Brazilian beef farmers the same level of quality,
I don't know. So when you look at ag, Brazil, believe it or not, Brazil is they are major competition to us, and they are very similar to us. I don't know about country size like that,
mm-hmm.
but when we're exporting corn and wheat, they are major competition, and beef, they're major competition,
Mm-hmm.
and
I have a
on the
suspicion,
world scale.
because I think if I remember last time, and I know this is slightly off topic, but I think, was it Brazil that's actually got like a pseudo-fascist dictator now that's taken over? But that might be irrelevant. But so, and I can imagine that most of these like foreign-owned corporate farmers, I bet if you looked at the major political contributions that the members of Congress and the Senate on the state legislatures and the national legislatures are probably getting large donations from these same corporations that are absorbing all the vast majority of the the subsidies. They're getting all the fast track. A lot of those regulations. So like when people talk about government regulations being hurtful to small business owners, a lot of those regulations were they were actually written by the actual major corporate industries themselves, and these big corporate like these big farmers. If you found any particular piece of legislation that had a form of regulation on small farmers, like if you looked at like you mentioned earlier, what was the one about how you couldn't really process your own meat and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, because it's got to be inspected by the USDA, and it's got to be inspected either by the state or the USDA. So if it's USDA, I can take a steak off of one of my cows or one of my steers, and I can mail it to my buddy in Vermont at whatever price I want to charge. I can send it to California. I can send it to wherever. Versus state inspected, I'm limited to just selling within the state of Alabama.
Yeah. So like those regulations and stuff most likely were written by lobbyists for these large corporations. You see this all the time. When a corporation, when there is regulation that gets passed, if at all possible, the industries that regulate will try to inject themselves in the regulation writing process, and they use the regulations as a way to create more barriers of entry, make it more difficult for small people for like small businesses to compete against their larger interests.
Tyson just argued about USDA inspectors, and they got something to change. I don't remember all the details on it, but it was probably a year and a half ago. They had something changed on the level of inspection that they're required to have on their pork with USDA inspectors.
Yeah, and so like these they get rules rewritten and written for them all the time. Meanwhile, guys like you have to keep abiding by more and more strict rules that they're writing for you.
And there's ways. I try to do things the right way, just because it's not worth the headache to me, But there's ways around. USDA, you want to do this to me, and you want to be booked out this far? Well, guess what? We're going to do what we call a herd share. Okay. And what a herd share, you see this more in dairy. You know that freaking selling raw milk, if I go out here and milk a cow and sell you a gallon of milk, that's just about as selling freaking, heroin. As far as the government looks at it, it's illegal.
Yeah.
And so people want that. People grew up on that, and people they don't want all the processed stuff. They want that whole milk straight from the cow. Whether it's so they can make their butter off of it, they can make their cream off of it. They can, just want the whole milk.
Mm-hmm.
There's a market for it. And so people will do what they call as a herd share. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell you part of my herd. It's going to cost you $10 a year for ownership of that. So now, guess what? Now you own a part of that cow, and I'm not selling you milk. I'm selling you my labor for milking our cow.
Yeah.
And so that gets around the USDA, and it gets around these other sources. And then they do the same thing on pork and beef, because they've got coolers and they're process slaughtering these animals themselves. And guess what? You own part of my herd. So you own part of that cow that I just slaughtered. You're paying me, $20 a pound for labor on that ribeye to raise that cow, to feed that cow, and to slaughter that cow. That's what you're paying for. You're paying me for labor. You're not paying for that meat because you already own the meat.
Okay.
And that's a way that folks are going around the government on it. And it's sad that people have to do that.
Yeah. And a lot of those reasons, like, you got these, because I think it's quite clear, it's quite obvious that our government does, quote unquote, get in the way of small business owners all the time. But the reason they're doing it is because the government is bought and sold to the highest bidder. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
I'd like to have, they have a poultry exemption. There's a USDA poultry exemption, which means that I can raise chickens on my farm however I want to raise them.
Mm-hmm.
And I can process 20,000 chickens a year on my farm, and I can sell them at farmers markets. I can sell them to direct consumers. I can sell it wherever I want to, up to 20,000 chickens a year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make good money doing that.
Yeah.
And I feel like we should have an exemption on beef and pork and lamb and goat. We should have an exemption on all that. Okay, well, look, if you're going to do this, these are the records that you need to keep. Okay, so that if we come in and audit you, we know exactly that you've done, 25 cows and you're allowed to do 30. Okay, so you're allowed to do 5 more this year. Some type of exemption. And then once you go above that, then you must have an inspected facility. I think that something like that, even with it just being a local health inspector, is the one that comes out and goes, "Hey, guy, where's your paperwork at?"
Yeah.
But you fall under that exemption, and then that enables farmers. And I tell you, so one of the parts we talked about earlier in the conversation was the poverty level of rural America, and both in the inner city where they're going to Dollar General. So now what that does is it makes it more affordable for me as a farmer to get into my local community and have local beef and local ground beef and affordable to some of these people in the community, that instead they're going to Dollar General and getting stuff that's been packed full of fillers. Walmart, their chicken, is injected with a water. Yeah, so they're selling it to you at $2 or $1 a pound, which is cheaper than what I'm selling it to you at, but it's also got 3 pounds of water in it too. Or the meat has a red.
Yeah, and how much more how much more expensive would that chicken be if they weren't being subsidized by the taxpayer dollar?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I feel like if we did something like that less government regulation on it, it'd still be regulated, but why not?
Yeah.
That's gonna get food into the local community.
Yeah, I don't think people in general have a problem with government regulation and practice. It's it's specific instances, and the majority of the time what we see is that government regulations are put in place so that corporate. So like what they do is when big corporations are forced to regulate, what they'll do is they use their political influence to shape regulations for their own benefit. So good news, and this is kind of good news back, is that the Green New Deal actually has a lot of that, and the Green New Deal is not a specific piece of legislation, but it's like a framework of like goals that that people in office want to push for. And so when it comes to farming, we worry about the environment and nature and sustainability of our environment and how the quality of our food. These big corporate farms have done this no services. They've basically, they've created food deserts. They've taken our tax money. They've engaged in, large scale pollution. It's a whole host of issues that they've caused. But the Green New Deal actually is going to put more focus on small family farms back that the New Deal did originally. So, like when it comes to how we refocus our farming practice, like one of the major points of the Green New Deal is to actually break up corporate banks, like these big corporate farmers, these big corporate like Monsanto and these other companies, and break them up. These big corporate monopolies, like that's one. So like that's one big thing, and when it comes to any of the stuff about the Green New Deal and like how it's gonna, like one of the goals to, give money to small farmers through loans and grants and what have you in the form of like helping them diversify, use more holistic agricultural methods, and have more biological diversity on their farms. And a lot of this is stuff like I've read about and trying to study this week, and I'm like, this stuff makes a quarter, like 25% sense, and the rest of it's going over my head because,
So,
there's just a lot there.
There's a place for big ag, and I will say that, and Monsanto, and people are talking about, oh no, Roundup, and this is terrible and it's killing people. Well, let's talk about some personal accountability, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I worked for rural development for a little bit of time, and one of the things that we looked at was in the guaranteed housing section, or the loan, basically like a VA loan, but the USDA backed it, okay? So, and it sickened me as a farmer to look out and see all these new housing constructions. That was a cornfield 2 years ago. It was a wheat field 2 years ago. They grew cotton there 2 years ago. Yeah. Okay, they raised beef there 3 years ago. Okay, so America keeps expanding further and further into rural America. These metropolitans they're going further and further out. Because I don't want to live in Madison. I want to live. I want to live in Ardmore, or I want to live in Athens. So they're moving further.
So, but yeah, I'm gonna move into a subdivision that they put up outside of the city.
Right. So now what we're doing, instead of having 1,000 acres, if you got a farmer that now has, instead of having 1,000 acres, they have 100 acres, and they're having to produce the same amount of yield per corn on corn or higher yields. Now, how do you do that? If I've got 1,000 acres, if I lose because of weed competition, and I'm getting, and once again, I'm not a corn farmer, so I don't know what the yield should be. So I'm getting 6 bushels an acre instead of, I'm okay with getting 6 bushels an acre because I've got all this land. Whereas I've got 100 of it, and I need to be getting 12 bushels an acre, and I've got to not have the weed competition, and I've got to have the genetic modified corn that's going to produce, 10 kernels more per ear, because that's what they're looking at. It's on a bigger scale. They're looking at how many kernels can I get off of 1 ear of corn, because that matters over the course of 2 acres, 10 acres, 1,000 acres, those couple more kernels of corn per ear go that much further, and you got to have that for flour. You got to have that for ethanol, because we got to be more environmentally friendly. So now our corn that we were using to eat and to feed animals with, part of it goes to ethanol,
Mm-hmm.
and so when the corona happened and people stopped driving and the price of fuel went down, guess what? It affected corn prices too because of ethanol.
Yeah.
So so there is a place for and it's funny, it's because it's the very same people who want to have that house in that subdivision that used to be a corn farm are the same ones raising Cain about Monsanto and all these other corporations and big farming and big ag, and they're trying to kill us. And, we have to have organic, but yet they're the reasons that's pushing the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you stop and look at it that way, and mind you, I'm a small farmer that, I can't afford to go spray chemicals on my tomatoes and my peppers and my corn every single time they need it.
Yeah.
I look at sustainable ways of doing it because it's much cheaper for me to plant stuff out there that's going to reduce my weeds, and my cows are going to eat the stuff, and then I don't have the weed pressure, or, plant crimson clover out there because it's going to produce nitrogen. It's cheaper for me to buy spend $40 on a 50-pound bag of crimson clover, than it is to pay, $300 or $400 for a ton of nitrogen to go out there on my property. It's
Yeah.
a lot cheaper. That's a no-brainer, but
Yeah.
but these bigger farms don't have that option.
Mm-hmm.
They're pushed to produce the same amount or more with less. I mean, and that's the world as a whole. It's not just ag,
Mm-hmm.
but so before we talk about all the bad things of these large farmers, these corporate farms or the corporate influence on it, that's it. It's what they're forced to do. The CEO of Tyson, was quoted, and I don't know which one it was. Don't make me put a name to it, but he made the comment. The American people is too stupid to be educated about antibiotics. So we are not going to run antibiotics on our animals. Period. You know, they're doing probiotics now. But the antibiotics they were using were keeping the animals healthy, and it was helping them digest food more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And then the USDA regulated said that 7 days before processing, they weren't allowed to have any antibiotics. But the American people didn't want to hear that. You couldn't educate them that. When you go into the grocery store and you see, oh, this is hormone free. Damn right, it's hormone free. It's illegal to inject hormones in the animal, but it's a selling point. Oh, I'm going to pay more because somebody put hormone free on their chicken package. You know, it's a selling point.
Mm-hmm.
But so now once again, we're having to be more creative to produce just as much, with less. And like I said, the American people, they keep spreading out and spreading out, and it's the people that are living in these communities are the ones raising hell about, uh, the GMOs and Roundup, and we need to sue these people for the Roundup, because so and so got cancer. There's there's not there's not enough science-based research behind that. There's enough that a liberal court awarded money on it, but I'm not a scientist. I understand how some of these chemicals work, and the fact that Roundup, if I'm not mistaken, it affects certain types of plants and it causes their cells to reproduce so fast that they die, and it's not affecting the corn that it's going
Mm-hmm.
on. The corn's not affected; it washes off. It doesn't absorb any of it. It's the other plants that are affected by it. And it's just the science behind some of this stuff. Uh, but like I said, so there's a purpose for it. There's a place for it. You know, uh, Mom and pop. There's not enough mom and pops that are raising pigs in their backyard. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's just not enough. You talk to so many people that oh, well, I remember with my grandpa. He raised 6 hogs and we slaughtered them in the fall, and then that was our pork for the year.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. So you have to have these confinement barns with that are taking up a space of 20 acres that are raising thousands and thousands of hogs.
See, I don't know. I'm gonna have to push you a little bit on that one because and like the whole, now I'd have to do some more research on the Monsanto Roundup because it's been years since I've heard, or I can't remember when that lawsuit happened.
I think
But
it was like 3 years ago.
yeah, maybe that's right. So like now we both agree that most people's lives are, they don't have the time to, everybody can raise their own pigs and slaughter their like 3 pigs for the year, and that's all their pork they need for the year. But when it comes to confinement farming, like of pork, like, and you know, you mentioned you raise pork, and you're probably, you know, or you're not confinement farming, are you?
No, nothing I do is confinement.
Okay, yeah, and so like our government is currently subsidizing these big confinement farms that raise this, you know, lower quality pork meat, and so that these companies can maximize profits. And I understand that a company and an individual, like you're a farmer, your job is to maximize profits because you're trying to make money. Like you're not a bad person for trying to make most money off the pounded meat you're making or growing. But like these, especially these big confinement farms, the amount of ecological damage that they can cause, you know, there's, you know, like it's not just that you have this pig that sits in this thing and then like that's the end of it. I mean, there's costs associated with the price of that business practice that's not necessarily reflective on the price tag of that pig. When you buy a pork loin, it's one of them pigs, and it's $3 a pound, like you might be paying more than $3 a pound. It's just you're paying for it somewhere else, because like a lot of these big especially when it comes to meat production, the the damage and the amount of pollution that they put off is all subsidized by the tax dollars. These companies aren't paying for these, you know, all the damage that they're doing when it comes to the environment. And when it comes to, you know, uh, like a lot of these like cleanup efforts from just not just big agribusiness, but the what was it, years ago during the Bush administration, that the oil spill in the Gulf. What was the name of that?
It was up in Alaska.
Not the one in Alaska. I'm talking about the one in the Gulf.
Okay.
But you know, like they were trying to expect the U.S. taxpayer to pay for this cleanup
Yeah,
when
yeah,
this
yeah. Was
business,
that BP?
yeah, the BP oil spill. That's what it was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were wanting the taxpayer, you and I, to foot the bill for cleaning up the oil spill that they caused. And you know, this happens all the time, and these companies get away with it because because they spend millions of dollars in paying for the electoral campaigns of
Hey,
whoever
listen,
it
I'm
is.
I'm real big. I'm real big into personal accountability. You know,
Yeah.
whether it be a farm, whether it be a business, whether it be an elected official, I think
Mhm.
term limits are going to be important for
Uh-huh.
ag, or not for ag, but for elected officials, Congress, you know, senators, uh, and you know they're talking about, you know, the whole pack the court deal. Oh, we're going to talk about packing the court and putting term limits. Guess what? I don't have a problem with term limits on the uh, Supreme Court, you know, or not
Mhm.
term limits, but, you know, 18 years, you know,
Yeah.
I feel like that some folks are, they get out of touch, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you know, the, Congressman Aderholm, you know, I don't think he's been in Congress for a long time, and he's a Republican. I'm not bashing him for that, you know. He's been in Congress for so long that I think there's areas that he's out of touch with, you know. There's, you know, obviously people that make careers. Biden's that way, you know. I think he's out of touch with the American people, you know. uh, you got people that are making these decisions that have no clue. So I went up with National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition in Washington, D.C. I made 2 trips up there, and I sat in front of uh, congressmen, senators, like I said, the budget committee, you know, advocating for money for farming and for sustainable agriculture. You know,
Mhm.
sustainable agriculture is one of the things you're talking about. That you might not use those words,
Yeah.
but that's what you were talking about. You want something that's going to be taking care of the environment, you
Mhm.
know. And I was like, you know, there's and putting money directly into local communities. Uh, you know, I was talking about a high tunnel. And the man who was in charge of the Senate or the House Appropriation Committee for agriculture didn't know what a high tunnel was, and
What exactly is a high tunnel?
so a high tunnel is kind of like a greenhouse,
Mhm.
okay, but it's typically it's a metal frame with a plastic covering over it, and it's completely enclosed, but the sides roll up and the doors roll up. The doors on the end, okay. And so what that does, it allows a vegetable farmer to extend their growing season or to grow things that wouldn't have been possible without that. Okay. Prime example is if I had a high tunnel right now, I would have tomatoes and peppers in it. And at Christmas, guess what I have here on the farm? I have tomatoes and peppers that I will be able to sell fresh out of my high tunnel or my field. I could sell it directly. And then now we have tomatoes that are not coming from Mexico. They're coming from Arab, Alabama, going to folks in the community where they're eating healthier and eating true fresh product. Tomatoes, peppers, that's common things. People will do lettuce. There's a ton of things that you can grow in them. But there's a program called EQIP with the USDA. It comes through NRCS, National Resource Conservation, I think. Anyway, so that program, what it does is it's a cost share. So they're going to say, okay, well, you want high tunnels? Well, we're going to pay 50% of that high tunnel, or we're going to pay, 90% of it. You hit different categories on that as far as your eligibility wise. And each county has a set amount of money. And that was one of the things I advocate for, hey, look, we have $75,000 in Coleman County, and you have 50 people applying for the EQIP program, which is not a high number, but on $50,000 or $75,000, and one of those high tunnels costs $7,000, that doesn't go a long way. Now, not everybody's applying for money on that. They're applying for cross fencing, waterers, beekeeping stuff for hunting, wildlife management. There's all kinds of different things that they pay for on that, but he didn't even know what a high tunnel was, and I get it, he's higher up and, should know some of this stuff. But a high tunnel is something very common that affects the farmer. And I think that if we had somebody that was from agriculture, that was an actual farmer on that committee, and go, hey, look, these are things that are important. Right now, I promise you, every daggum animal guy that every farmer that produces livestock that direct markets their meat has the same issue across the country. I can't find a processor to get my animals in it. I'm on Facebook groups that all across the country, these farmers are having the exact same problem. Man, I'm out till 2022. Man, I'm processing December 2021. And that affects us. That's our livelihood. When I think, okay, well, I'm going to try to do 20 steers next year, and I can only get a slot for 6 steers, and I'm not saying that I make $1,000 an animal, but we'll just use that round number, so instead of doing 20, I'm doing 6. That's a $14,000 loss because I'm limited at processing spots, and if somebody that were in Congress or on these boards was affected by $16,000, and let's just say they made $100,000 a year. I mean, that's a 16% loss in revenue, and businesses across the board can see that. Hey, that's a 16% loss. So I think if you look at it in a perspective like that, so I think term limits are important, or getting the actual people that should be there, that actually represent the people.
Like, I don't disagree with you on term limits necessarily, but, and this is not really a but, this is more of an and, but it's, when you look at, look over here where I'm sharing, this is Mr. Adderholt. And I only brought him up not to pick on him, but just because you brought him up.
Yep.
let's look at this is literally where his money to get reelected comes from. You got 700, I don't know who the NRCC is, which I guess we could Google that. But we look at, he got,
Yep.
these are all super PACs who have given him money. These pay for, this is, and now, not picking on Republicans because Democrats are just as bad when it comes to, and there was a report, I can't remember, but it was like 50% of people who are both Democrats and Republicans don't feel like the party that they vote for generally represents their interests. And this is why. Like, you look at when these people are the ones who are paying. Bob Aderholt does not work for the people of Alabama. Bob Aderholt works for Blue Cross and Blue Shield and Altria and the NRCC, whoever they are. Yeah. And if they're, and we can just Google them just for giggles. I don't
That's
know
a
who
pretty good chunk of change there.
Yeah, I mean, National Republican Congressional Committee. So Lord knows where that money comes from because that money's getting filled. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you literally could, because it's going straight to the party, and that party doesn't have to annotate where it comes from. But you're looking at, and the Democrats are the same way. So when it comes to looking at how, they don't care because, they use this money to run ads when they have to run for re-election.
Yeah.
And, I don't have a problem with term limits. I'm okay with term limits. Now, the only difference is if you don't stop this, where it allows there's an unlimited amount of money in government that the National Chicken Political Action Committee, I have a feeling this isn't small local farmers that have given him $25,000 at one time. This is probably, big corporate farmers like we're talking about. So when you go to him and you say, hey, we need something for small local farmers, and he goes, oh, too bad, I've done giving these people money because they're the ones. Go ahead.
What's funny is he's the one that was the head of he's not now because it's Democratic run, but he was in charge of the Republican or the Ag Committee for the Congress, the House Agriculture, whatever the hell it is. So it's funny that you see all these ag people supporting him because he has political power, a political pull in that area. That being said, we did get funded for all of our ask when we went in there on the sustainable agriculture, but I wanted him to see, hey, look, this is how this affects us,
Yeah, and so there's a general idea, and
let's say how long he's been in Congress.
We can Google it.
And I like the guy. Don't get me wrong.
I haven't met him, so I don't have any.
Yeah, so this is not a bash on him.
No, but I mean, and he's no different. And when I say this, is I can guarantee you, just to the very fact that, how can you trust that he represents the will of the people that he he claims to represent when his.
And I think this is both. I think this is both sides of the.
Yeah, this is a both sides thing.
This is not a Republican or a Democratic thing. This is elected official, period.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when they are allowed to generate as much money from, let's see here, let's look at his Wikipedia page because that might be a little bit more.
You found the legit stuff there.
Yeah, so it's surprising. You can't use it in a college paper, but what you do is when you write a college paper on Bob Aderholt, you go to the Wikipedia page, and then you go down here and then you reference these citations.
Yeah.
But don't directly reference Wikipedia. You go to Wikipedia, and then you go to where Wikipedia cites, and you cite those.
Yeah.
Let's see here. In office, that's Judge.
1997, is that right?
Assumed office 97. So I mean,
I like that one. The very first sentence.
So yeah, when you look at
23 years.
Yeah, so he's been in office. He's been in Congress 23 years. His money comes from, he's running for re-election on money that big corporations are giving, and and this is so when you go to him and you say, hey, we need such and such on such and such, regardless of what the issue is, if his donors that pay for him to get reelected don't support that policy, it doesn't matter how much it'll benefit the people he represents. Can you really trust that he's actually going to push for those policies?
Right.
I'm going to segue and this is not really a Democrat versus Republican thing, because most lefties hate the Democrat Party. Let's be real. And because we kind of understand, the Republican Party is just outright open about it. Yeah, we take money from corporations because corporations are good and they haven't done anything bad ever, which is just wrong. I mean, it's not like everything. I have a Samsung smartphone. I like my smartphone, but it doesn't mean that corporations you always get a pass for everything. But the Democrat Party will come around, they have to play games that no, we're not influenced by our donors. But they are. We all know that. They try to act like they aren't, but we all know they are. You can look at how they acted during the DNC primary. And Donald Trump was calling them out on it on Twitter. He was just straight up and yeah, they're trying to cheat Bernie hard. We know they cheated Bernie. And how they used the backroom dealing because of how they took money from these big corporate donors, and they're not going to let these policies that actually help working people come to the forefront of their own party. Even in the DNC, when they were trying to get an actual Democrat Party platform passed, they were pushing progressives and the more quote unquote lefty people of the party to the fringes. They wouldn't even on a platform, which is non-binding. So if Greg's running as a Democrat out of Montana and the platform says, we're going to support Medicare for all, you as a person go, yeah, I may be running as a Democrat, but I don't support Medicare for all. They couldn't even get anything on the progressive agenda put on the non-binding platform of the Democrat Party. Even though Medicare for all, as an example, has 70% approval amongst registered Democrats. Would not get it on there. And so to claim that, this party represents the will of its voters is just ridiculous. And so this is a two-party problem. And it goes to my other problem is that we really don't actually have two parties in this country. We have one party that represents billionaires and corporations, and then we've got, they just have two different offices. Republicans just do it openly, and Democrats try to act like they don't represent billionaires, but they absolutely do. You can just go look at Dianne Feinstein or whoever's campaign contributions and look and see where they came from.
That's right.
Yeah, when Dianne Feinstein or so for example, Medicare for all is an interesting issue in the DNC. Pharmaceutical companies are a huge investor. I'm gonna minimize Robert Adderholt here. Nothing against him necessarily, but pharmaceutical companies donate millions to Democrats across in Congress, and they donate millions to Republicans. So, and Obamacare as a policy was partially written by not pharmaceutical companies, but health insurance companies. And it was a big handout to them because they don't want to lose their business, because we've seen, for various reasons. And I don't want to get onto, because I know we want to mainly talk about farming and whatnot, but the overall structure of how government works is that our government right now is it's up to the highest bidder, and that these politicians are bought and sold by these billionaires and corporations. So how can we instill trust in our government institutions when they're, the people in the USDA, or at the upper levels of the USDA, they're put there by the same industries they're supposed to regulate. And it's not, small local. Yeah, you're not going to get elected to be the next head of the USDA. It's going to be someone from Tyson or Monsanto or whoever is going to be the next head of the USDA.
So in 2008, the 2008 Farm Bill, I want to say it's 2008 Farm Bill, it put a veteran liaison in the USDA, and I really don't know how that position is appointed, but it is an appointed position. And I
What you're
like the
saying is
guy
you
that,
might be the next head of the USDA is what you're trying to tell me?
shoot, I like, no, I like the guy that's in there now. I mean, I've hung out with him multiple times. He's been here to Alabama, but he'll tell you he doesn't know anything about farming. You know, and so I think that's part of the problem is you don't have farmers in there that are affected by these things.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think that if we had a guy that was a veteran and a farmer in that position, because it must be a veteran, I think that we would see a lot more results from it versus, somebody that, hey, look, I'm a veteran and I don't know what he did prior to this, but, I worked in the automotive industry, but I'm a veteran. So, and that's not what we need. We need somebody that, like here in the state of Alabama, Chris started that program called Operation Grow. And I think that one of the things that has come to light of this is I've started working a lot with some of the local extension offices and that I've networked with and got to meet. And I'll get an email that says, "Hey, Greg, this is so and so. He just got out of the Army or he just got out of the Air Force and bought some land and is trying to get into farming, or they're getting ready to move back here and they're trying to get into farming, and you're a great resource." I think that those are needs that we have as a veteran community, and it's not just farming. I mean, I think that there's it goes for, I guess, stuff and whole, from lack of a better way to put it. People that are actually doing the job that can help. There's nobody knows more about applying for grants and working with the USDA and working with NRCS to get the equip stuff. There's nobody knows more about it than I do. I mean, there's people that know more about it than me, but I know I would be more of a subject matter expert than you are on it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And they go, "Oh, well, he's a veteran and we're going to put him in the spot." Well, we don't even have a spot for that here in the state. We don't have anybody in the state that is the official go-to person. There's nobody in the state of Alabama Department of Agriculture that is a veteran liaison that goes, "Hey, okay, you're a veteran. Let's talk about options that you have. Let's talk about opportunities. Let's talk about funding."
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody in the state for that, and I feel that that's an important position, not just in Alabama, but I think it's an important position in all states.
Yeah.
And I think that if we had folks that were not career politicians, they would see this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And yeah, you got that problem with people being, I mean, I'm 100% okay with having term limits on politicians. And I don't think anybody in America is against the concept of term limits. I mean, that's probably one of those 90%. Like if you polled like every American, like 90% would be like, yeah, sure, term limits on everybody. I don't have any scientific numbers to support that, but I imagine it'd be pretty high. And so when you couple that, now it doesn't, if you had term limits, it doesn't do you any good if there's a legalized system of bribery in place that allows, what you're going to have is the revolving door of bribery and corruption is just going to move faster.
Yep.
So someone goes in there and does their 4 terms or whatever before they're ousted legally.
And then they get out and they're,
and they go work for the companies that they were supposed to.
A lobbyist.
Yeah. So we've got to stop that. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug real quick in here. If you want to look, this is there's a organization called Movement for a People's Party. We're advocating for creating a third major party. And this is generally along progressive politics, but this is a party that's supposed to be working for working class people. And one of the major things is, there's two, is that, and you can come to peoplesparty.org/platform and look at the actual party platform, like where as a party we stand, and there's all kinds of stuff. But we look at sustainable agriculture, and like this is mainly focusing, and I'm going to say this, the quick down and dirty is that supporting something like the Green New Deal and supporting local farmers and investing in actual local community-based farmers and not giant agricultural, big corporate big ag necessarily. I don't necessarily say that those institutions shouldn't exist, but we need to actually do more to move towards, small farmers like yourself and others, especially when it comes to protecting our environment and protecting our climate for years to come. And we actually can go into talk more about climate change and stuff if you're interested. But and this is one of the major moments, or where is there's, let me see here, animal, one of the major parts of this. So the Movement for a People's Party, one of the major political stances and political positions of the party is that, let me see here, where it's in here somewhere. It's going to be, how much have I had? This podcast is actually brought to you by Wild Turkey. Okay. So this is actually one of the major political positions of the Movement for a People's Party, is getting corporate money and super PACs and billionaire money out of our elections. So when it comes to, if somebody's running, and so in the next few years, you're going to start seeing people running for political office in Alabama and in every state across the country, hopefully, that are going to be running in the members of the People's Party. And the major promise that this party puts in place is that we will not be running candidates who are receiving a dime in corporate money. All the donations and financing for these campaigns are going to be funded by actual voters and actual working class peoples, and not billionaires spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their way. Now, that being said, and like I said, like I showed you, we talked about sustainable agriculture. We can't really trust our politics. And I think in general, people who vote Democrats and Republicans both understand there's no real trust that we have in our voters or in our elected officials, because there's lots of different reasons, but we all know that they're corrupt and they're thought out. And I'm perfectly okay with term limits on, and term limits I think would be a good thing, but I think term limits on themselves, isn't going to be enough. We have to literally stop, this legalized system of corruption and bribery. What do you think?
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most definitely.
So we can transit. I know you like hunting. I like hunting and fishing too. And I think we can, if you would like to, we can actually start talking about how much longer do you got before we gotta let go. I don't know how busy you are today.
Yeah, probably not too much longer.
Okay, we can keep going until whenever you have to go. But
another 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, we can do a quick 10 minutes on climate change if you like.
I thought you said we were talking about hunting.
Well, I think, in my opinion, it's kind of all together.
Yeah.
For example, because you and I both remember that the Fallen Outdoors that did. We took veterans out hunting, and I think that's awesome, and it was good for people. And when it comes to being environmental impact, eating wild game meat, and living closer to nature is actually the best thing for our environment. But we have to understand that how we've done business for the past, however long, it's not been working out for the average people. We're looking at in the next 50 to 100 years serious environmental impact caused by climate change, and and not just climate change, just general pollution, pollution in general. But our this way of life, especially from rural voters, like people like you and I who really like hunting and fishing and going out, is that way of life going to be preserved in the next 50 to 100 years to our ancestors, or not our ancestors, but our progeny, I guess is the correct word, if
So
we don't, yeah, go ahead.
go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, I was just saying, can we guarantee that those opportunities to live that lifestyle, to hunt and fish for your own food and live close to nature, own a small family farm, are those, is that way of life going to be preserved if we don't do anything about climate change now? Because the chance for doing what, David? Yeah, my guitar's in here. Go on, Daddy's on the phone. Turn your movie on in a minute. Sorry about that. But that way of life is under serious threat. And our government had the opportunity in the 70s and 80s when they were first being presented with the evidence for climate change. Like, scientists first started going to the U.S. Congress saying, hey, us dumping tons and tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is going to lead to some serious problems. Our government's known about this for 40, 50 years. And, the bigger oil companies, for example, have buried the information. They did their own independent research and come to find the same conclusions. And they engaged in long-term campaigns of misinformation to keep people from knowing the truth. And those of us who like hunting and fishing and like living close to the land, and I want to be able to take my kids and my grandkids duck hunting in 50 years or 30, 40 years. I don't know if I'll live 50 years. Maybe I'll be 80. Maybe. I don't know if I'll be healthy enough to duck hunt in 50 years, but will my son be able to take his grandkids duck hunting, and so on and so forth? And if the climate's drastically changed, those opportunities may not be there, especially at the rate things are happening. So, like, does that give you pause or concern when you think about those, or is that something you kind of try to keep out of mind, or do you even think that those are issues at all?
So I think that there's things that we can do in our environment that I don't necessarily know about the climate change, but I think there's things that we can do for our environment to maintain it that may affect or negatively or positively affect things. So once again, when I went to Washington D.C., I met some big farmers from Kansas, and they're big row croppers. Mm-hmm. And I will try to find this picture and send it to you. But they're they tell you that, okay, well, we get 10 inches of rain a year. How do we make that stretch for our corn? So they're real big in what they call no-till agriculture. So what they do is they'll never, till the soil. They'll kill off whatever's on top of it, and then they'll plant directly into it. Whether they're planting a cover crop they may plant their wheat and then go right back over their wheat with corn and not turn the soil. They'll just drill right into it. And then they'll have their corn. But what it does is it keeps that soil intact. So the old philosophy of a lot of people will tell you, oh, well, I'm going to turn my soil and let it sit for a year, and I'm just going to let that field sit there, and I'm going to keep it bare soil so that there's no weeds. And the no-till philosophy says, no, there should always be something on it, the organic material, the mass behind it. Well, he's got a picture of, like, right now we've got the hurricane coming. The hurricane itself is not coming through, but we're starting to get the winds from it, or get the rain from it right now. That soil will wash away. And he said we can screw a lot of things up as farmers. We can screw up the amount of grain that we plant this year. We may miss a sign of pest out there, or we may screw up and not give this group of cattle the right amount of feed, so my gains were whatever. Or a simple gamble, like last year I took cows to the stockyard. It was my first year. I took them 1 week later. I was watching the prices. I was told sell before the last week of April or before the end of April. So the last week of April, I took all my cows. Well, I got 20 to 30 cents less a pound than had I brought them a week before. I screwed that up. I missed it, And so we can recover from that. But one of the things we can't recover from is losing our soil.
Yeah.
And he's got a picture of the neighbor's farm and his farm with where it had rained, and it's two creeks coming together. One creek is brown and the other one is crystal clear. The one that's brown comes off his neighbor's farm that's conventional tilled, and that's his soil literally washing away in the creek with the rain.
Oh yeah.
And the one on the other side is coming off of his farm where he did that no-till drilling, and so all that soil and the biomass is intact, so it's
Yeah.
all still there.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that is definitely an environmental impact that we deal with, and that we can maintain better. You look out in California, they're dealing with the wildfires right now.
Mm-hmm.
People are screaming climate change, but it's only certain areas that are affected by it. Canada is not dealing with the exact same things that we're dealing with wildfires that they're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with in California. The prescribed burns, actually managing our forest is something that if we were to manage them better, we would be dealing with those. I mean, that we still have wildfires because it is something that actually occurs. But if we were doing prescribed burns and keeping the forage bottom maintained, it's going to help the forest do better, but it's also going to help the wildlife, the natural wildlife, because when you think of prescribed burn, you think of Bambi, and you see Bambi running, and they're all running from the fire. When that's not the case, what it's actually doing is it's allowing for that lower vegetation to come back up, and it's providing a food source for them year round. Versus, everything grows up and up and up, and there's nothing on the forest floor. There's no diversity there for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if we did more of these things, we would take care of our wildlife better, and we would have that in the future, and then we would still have these forests, and we wouldn't be dealing with where people are losing their lives and losing their homes just because something's not managed properly.
Yeah, which I think, generally speaking, I don't think people have a problem with wildlife management. Like, that's just, or forest management. It hasn't been done in a lot of places for various reasons, and mainly because it's an expensive endeavor, and it doesn't, it looks like, you look at the Excel spreadsheet and that's a number that they can chop off. So it's not as important. But like, when it comes to climate change specifically, we know there's two things. Like, the science is pretty clear. Like when I say vast majority, it's like 99% of scientists are like, climate change is real. It has serious effects. And now, one of the good things and kind of bad things is that not North Alabama, but North America is going to be one of the areas where the amount of direct impact is not nearly as significant as other parts of just the Americas. But which, when you got sea level rise and all kind, the amount of people who are going to that are going to be, if we don't do anything real soon, like the amount of refugees who are having to flee rising sea levels and all the other like, there's so many different side effects that will come from climate change. Like, you think, people complain now that we got too many people jumping across the border. Wait till for 50 to 100 years from now, if climate change is mitigated, how many people you're going to have fleeing the border? How many people you're going to have fleeing the coastal areas of the United States now? Farming is going to become much more difficult, and being able to live off, hunt and fish is going to become much more difficult. These are problems that exist. But, and honestly, the Green New Deal, in my opinion, creates a avenue, especially for small farmers, for us to refocus how we, not just how we generate energy, but how we create food and how we treat our public lands. So
So
like,
I'm not,
go
I'm
ahead.
not necessarily, I'm not exactly a climate change guy. I'm not quite on board with that.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it, and I'm not a scientist. I'm just a guy, you know.
Uh-huh.
But I do feel that I'm an environmental guy, you know,
Yeah.
because I do believe in taking care of the environment. I think that uh, if our forests burn and then you've got bare soil, you know, and uh, uh, you know that's going to cause the temperature of the soil. So that's going to affect that's going to affect things around it. You know,
Mhm.
if like a concrete or a uh, blacktop asphalt top of a city parking lot, you know, you walk across that barefoot versus walking across my grass barefoot.
Oh yeah.
This on the same temperature is two different things. It's either going to burn your feet or it's going to be cool and soothing to your feet.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so uh, is that what's affecting it? You know, but I think that if you know that may affect the temperatures of the air a little bit, but uh,
Well,
that
when
you've
we
got
say
things that are
yeah, go well, I hate to interrupt, but like when we say a little bit, we're talking about a degree of overall global temperature change, like uh, 1 degree of temperature change globally is drastic levels of damage. When it comes to like the natural, like if you look over here where I got posted, so like this is just off the NASA's climate change website. This is the carbon dioxide levels in parts per million now versus the last 800,000 years of recorded history, which they were able to go to ice cores and get these levels, how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. I mean,
so.
you can
So
just
what eliminates carbon dioxide?
from the atmosphere. Uh,
Yes.
so how carbon dioxide gets out of the atmosphere takes a long time. Like, and I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but
Trees,
yeah, trees pull
plants.
out carbon. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. This
So
level right here. But what I'm saying is, how much deforestation has happened over the last since 1950, right here. The
how many?
major like the largest carbon sink on the planet is the Amazon rainforest, and it's on fire right now, and
So
it's being deforested.
so I'll argue that point
Uh-huh.
with it, have we lost more of the rainforest, or have we lost more of the urban community or the rural areas to uh, blacktop asphalt and housing areas? I guarantee you we've lost more land to that than we have the Amazon rainforest. I guarantee you we have.
I
You
mean, we
know,
can
and
just,
I'm not a scientist.
I mean, we can Google it. Which it's kind of like a hard. So the answer is probably like let's just assume the answer is yes. Let's assume the answer is the same amount of. Let's just assume it's the same. Like the amount in the Amazon by itself isn't the only quote unquote problem. Like the amount of the Amazon that's being converted into farmlands and whatnot, where you
Yeah.
got this like very biodiverse jungle is getting demolished and replaced with banana groves. That's bad. Also, the expanding and putting in more concrete and everything else. Like the way our society is actually focused right now is generating as much money as humanly possible. And climate change is what's considered a market externality in the sense that the profit motive under capitalism is leading to this because the people who are profiting from this situation are the same ones who are spending millions of dollars on politicians in
And
America,
and
especially.
the same people that are raising Cain about climate change are the ones that are cutting down that local park and putting a freaking uh, uh, residential area into. You know, it's the same people. You know, it's
I
not the
would
guy out here. It's not the guy out here on a farm that's doing everything he can to take care of his property that's raising
actually,
Cain about climate change. It's the person that used to live in California and now lives in you know Harvest, that used to be a place where they actually harvested stuff, and now it's a nothing but houses next door to each other. You know, it's
yeah,
that guy that worked for Boeing in California that found out it's a lot cheaper to live in Alabama and got a job over here, and now they live in a neighborhood that used to produce corn, and now they're going to raise cane because you're using GMO corn. I think that's it's that I think that's the person that is. I look at it as that way. I look at that's the same person. That's the same person that's crying about climate change is the one that could live in a high rise in downtown LA, or whatever. But they pushed out to a more residential area that or an urban area that used to be a cornfield.
Yeah. So
you're trying to kill me because you're feeding those cows a non-GMO corn, and we're going to talk about climate change, and your cows are farting and putting gases in the air,
Yeah.
So that's what I'm at on it,
So what I would say is, I think, Greg, I don't think you're a dumb guy at all. I think you're very smart. You know a lot more about farming than I do, because that's not what I do for a living. I mean, we could sit here and talk about IT all day, and I could ramble off stuff, and you'd probably be like, you would know what I'm talking about, and you're talking about a bunch of farming stuff that I don't understand.
Listen, I have a hard time, and I log onto my computer, and it tells me to put in my password, and I press I, and it gives me a star on the screen. I can't figure that out. I push G, I get a star on the screen.
Yeah. So, but what I'm saying, so here's the thing, you and I, so and Greg, especially as a small farmer and a veteran and just a regular working class dude, you are not the problem when it comes to climate change. And lefties in general, and speaking as a lefty, as one of the quote unquote radical left that a lot of Republicans like to talk about, as your official friend who's a member of the radical left, I'm gonna tell you, you're not the problem. The guy who lived in California and moved to Harvest because whatever reason, he's not the problem either. The real problem is you've got it's 70% of all the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere are caused by the same 5 corporations. I mean, and those numbers aren't exact, so nobody be like, well, actually it's 65 and it's 7 but in general, it's a very small handful of people and organizations are responsible for the vast majority of the carbon dioxide. It's not Greg in Alabama running his cattle farm. You're not the problem. And there's things that we could be doing as a country and as a society to address the problems that exist, or we can turn a blind eye to the problem. Because the fact of the matter is, and I would challenge you to go look at it, and we can do another talk later where we just go on to climate change and just go about all the extreme events, and this is from our own government, acknowledging everything that's happening. And we know that there is some potential very bad stuff that can happen, and you and I are going to be the people who are going to face, and our children and their children are going to be the ones who are going to face the consequences. The people who are, ExxonMobil, I think it was Exxon, did their own internal investigation starting in the 1970s to determine whether or not climate change was real. And their own internal models showed how bad it was going to be. And they actually reported the damage that climate change could cause to their own investors, but publicly engaged in paying off politicians and running ads and running misinformation campaigns to convince the public at large that climate change wasn't real. And that's the only reason their law, that when they got sued I think it was the state of New York, that the lawsuit didn't go through because according to the lawsuit was said, well, they lied to investors. Well, the fact of the matter is they told their investors the truth. But their investors are just keep doing what you're doing and getting every dime you can. And so we as a society have to understand that, we have to figure out a way forward. And the Green New Deal as a framework puts power and economic power into the hands of small farmers like yourself and on lots of different ways for y'all to be able to diversify incomes, to invest in your local communities, to invest in your own farms. So like I got some of this stuff from the Green New Deal right here. So there's, once again, helps farms of all sizes to engage in more sustainable farming practices, build up rural communities and strengthen the environment, creates local jobs, keeps wealth in those communities, helps new farmers that are currently underserved in existing USDA programs. So, there's
They already
all
have
kinds
that though.
yeah, they have that. But what I'm talking about is expanding this role, and by breaking up a lot of that power that's going to the corporate farmers and giving it
Like
to everybody.
literally. So let's just talk about the NRCS for the EQIP program. Literally, those, you got the underserved, you have the females, you have the minorities. Those are all things that you check on those boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is you have one pot of money for the county, okay, that you compete in. And then if you fall into those categories, there's state level funding that you compete at. And then you compete at a national level too, that's special funding just for the underserviced people.
Yeah.
And so literally, I fall into that category as being a disabled veteran. So, I get to compete on the three pots also, but an average guy, that my neighbor who never served in the military, who is a white male, he doesn't get to compete three times. He competes one time at that $75,000, and if he don't get it, he don't get it,
Mm-hmm.
Because he's a white male.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And so because he only gets to compete one time, so they already have those programs in there. They're already in place, and they're already working. So that guy that's a white male, he can't compete but one time,
Uh-huh.
So these programs are already there,
Yeah.
So I don't know what they're trying to push on it.
Well, what we're talking about is just expanding the existing programs, making them better, and putting our focus away from the types of farming that are more damaging to the economy. Because once again, like guys like you aren't the problem. Your farming method, what you guys are doing as a small, locally owned farmer, you own your own place. You guys aren't the major problem. The major problem is, the big corporate institutions that are, and it's a whole thing. We basically, the idea is that we should have more farmers like you and less farmers that are doing all the containment farming and when it comes to raising cattle and everything else. And
so I think that, like, once again, we're talking about these folks have their place in society, because there's when I tell you that I want $8 a pound for pork chops, there's people that turn their nose up to it, and they're going to go to Walmart and they're going to get their $1.59 a pound pork chop, and that's who feeds the masses.
But what I'm saying is the government should be subsidizing you, the person who's doing it right, versus the corporation who's doing it the wrong way and is not only damaging the environment, but our climate and everything else. Like that, when they go to Walmart and they buy a pork chop at $3 a pound versus you at $8 a pound, there's $5 that's going somewhere else. Like that pork chop they're selling ain't just cheaper because it's just cheaper. Like there's all kinds of problems that $3 pork chop is got attached to it. And the person who's shopping at Walmart, it's not their fault neither, because they have limited income and they have limited resources. We're subsidizing people doing it the wrong way, and we're punishing people doing it the right way. And what I'm saying is our government should be supporting people like you, not the people who can afford to spend $30,000 to Representative Adderhole. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think, and a lot of this is getting, kind of lost in the weeds where, you and I, like, we can both agree. I think you generally, like, we both understand that Like, I actually think you're a good person. I think you work real hard. I think you're doing all the right things. You're trying to raise your family, take care of your 2 boys. I don't think you're trying to like dump a bunch of waste on the economy, like on the environment. You may not necessarily think that climate change is as big of a deal as I do, and maybe we can have another episode where that's all we talk about. And I want you to understand. The only thing I would say that I want you to understand is that people on the left, like me, and the Movement for a People's Party specifically, are on your side. In that we think that the government should represent working people, not just the people who can afford to pay off politicians. And you know, like I don't think that corporation stuff should just stop existing, but I do think like we have to have a government that holds them accountable where it matters, and we have to have a government that represents working people, because like look at all over the country, rural areas across America. What if people were able to make a living off of farms like yours all over America and serve their local community and go into the cities and go into everywhere, and they could, you know, maybe not, we're not saying they all have to be billionaires. Like, I like you, Greg, but whether or not you make $1 billion is irrelevant to me. But whether or not you make $1 million is irrelevant. I would like, if you make $1 billion or $1 million, I need some.
I'll write you a check.
Yeah, but I think everybody deserves to be able to make live in dignity and make a decent living. And we as a society, a lot of the problems we have right now is the fact that big corporations have been able to run away with, they're able to pay off the politicians. They're able to dominate the market because they're able to push off their costs on other people and get into all these, get market advantages that not everybody else can have. And they're able to rake in millions and billions and screw American working people. So like what I would say is we need a government that works for people like you, not for people necessarily like Monsanto and Tyson. They got enough money. They got enough help. And it's time that working people had that same advantage. And people like you, in your opinions, even though like we don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, and I would love to talk to you more about some of this stuff, because like this is a lot of stuff that I just weren't even aware of, like all these different policies and programs and whatnot, that I think it's important because you have a perspective that's often overlooked. And especially on the American left, the Republican Party has done nothing for working class people officially.
I don't think the Democratic Party is either.
Definitely not. I mean, you and I, like, I'll agree with you on that all day or day. The Democrat Party works for Wall Street donors just like Republican Party does. So that's why we need a movement for a new party, or to make sure that our government is responsive to working class people. How much more time you got left?
I'm fixing to jump off here.
Hey man, yeah. I appreciate you coming on. I
actually had
a good time talking. We'll do this again sometime.
For sure.
Hey,
and I'm not jumping off here just because we don't agree on climate change.
No, we can do. Yeah, we can do another talk.
2 hours and 20 minutes, and I gotta get out and get some work done on the farm. So I got cows that are hungry. They don't feed themselves here.
Oh, it's all good, brother. Man, I appreciate you having. You have a good one.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
See ya, everybody. Thank y'all for listening. This is the Free People's Podcast.